Hi, I'm John Tenuto, co-author of the book Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, The Making of the Classic Film.
Hi, I'm Maria Jose Tenuto, co-author of Star Trek II, The Making of the Classic Film, and you are listening to Trek Untold.
Welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. On today's special episode, we are chatting with a pair of authors who have a brand new Star Trek book out that demystifies a very, very famous entry in the Star Trek movie franchise. If you were to say The Wrath of Khan was the best Star Trek movie of all time, you'd find very few people arguing with you. You might have a few saying First Contact might be better, but for the most part, it's agreed upon that Wrath of Khan is one of the top-tier Star Trek films. And not just Star Trek 2, when we're talking about how great this film is. This movie is one of the top sci-fi films of all time. And even beyond that, this is a genre-breaking film that everybody universally can love, even if they've never watched a single episode of Star Trek. And that's quite a feat to accomplish. For decades, The Wrath of Khan has been discussed, dissected, and analyzed from every single angle possible, and you would assume that the story about the film is pretty much done and everything we need to know about it is out there. But according to these two authors that we're talking to today on Trek Untold, the story is still out there and at last now finally opened up for everyone to understand. Today on this episode of Trek Untold, we're talking to John and Maria Jose Tenuto, a married pair of sociology professors who have a serious, deep love and knowledge of Star Trek and Star Trek history. The new book is called Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, The Making of the Classic Film, and it's coming to us courtesy of a company called Titan. And this is one of their many arms because they also have Titan merchandise. This is Titan Books or Titan Publishing. I always forget which one it is. But Titan's been around for a long time, and I've known it because of all the toys that they make, because they do a great job making Star Trek toys, although they haven't done any in quite some time. But not only that, they've been doing a lot of Star Trek books. For example, several autobiographies of some Starfleet captains have been published by Titan as well. So this is like a perfect entry in their sci-fi genre books, and also a really, really wonderful coffee table book with a load of new information for all you Trekkies out there. John and Maria Jose have been toiling on this book for ages, and at last it is finally here, and it really is breaking down some things we've never heard about before. The book features brand new interviews with Nicholas Myers, a lot of the cast of the film, the behind-the-scenes production crew of the film even. They really left no stone unturned. And that's why I had to have them on Trek Untold, because they literally wrote the untold story of The Wrath of Khan. And in my chat with them, I learned about a bunch of things I had never ever heard about, and chances are you probably haven't either. And I don't really want to spoil anything here, but I'm actually just getting goosebumps thinking about some of the stuff they told me. And the book goes even more in depth. So yeah, this is going to be a real must-have for any serious Star Trek fan out there. And that's really not just a shameless plug, that is the honest truth. This book really has found out some stuff that no one's known about before, and your mind's going to be blown by the time we're done chatting. But as I mentioned, John and Maria Jose are also sociology professors, so we're going to talk a little bit about the sociology of Star Trek before we get into Khan. So we're covering a lot of ground here in this very diverse, very educational, and also highly entertaining episode of Trek Untold. So I hope you'll stick around and enjoy this conversation with John and Maria Jose Tenuto. But before we get to this week's episode, I want to thank my patrons who've been supporting this show for quite some time now. So shout out to all my Patreon supporters. And if you want to become a Patreon supporter and help out this podcast, you can do so by checking out patreon.com/trekuntold. There are several tiers for how you can support the show financially if you're in a position to do so. But you can also just follow the Patreon page completely for free if you want to. So go ahead and check that out at patreon.com/trekuntold. There's also going to be some links in the show notes for different stores you can pick up things, including my Amazon affiliate store and the official Teespring Trek Untold merchandise store. But if you're not in the mood to spend any money, you can still do plenty of stuff for free, like follow us on social media. So you can check us out on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, and whatever the heck that the greatest supervillain the world has ever seen named Elon Musk is calling Twitter these days. You can find me all at Trek Untold. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe to youtube.com/@trekuntold. And likewise, if you're checking out this show on any of the different audio platforms we're available on, please subscribe. And if you're able to, leave a comment, leave a rating, leave a review, whatever you can do to help interact with the episode to help get more Trekkies out there to discover this podcast. Shout out to show sponsor as well, Triple Fiction Productions. You're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in this episode. So that's all the techno babble out of the way. Let's go ahead now and get this show started, and let's chat with John and Maria Jose Tenuto. Computer, access interview file. They're authors, they're professors, they're toy collectors, and best of all, they are Trekkies. Please welcome to Trek Untold today, John and Maria Jose Tenuto.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Or whatever time it is.
Whatever time it is they're listening, who knows? Whatever's going on in this time-space continuum, I have no idea. That's up to them. But yeah, very excited to talk to you guys here today because we're going to be talking Star Trek, of course, as it's pretty clear by the name of the show. But we're also going to be talking later today about your new book, which is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, the making of the classic film. John, you and I have been talking, I realized, for over a year about this book. So I'm very excited that it's finally here. I'm sure you guys are too.
Yes.
Absolutely. In fact, here it is. We have a little curve. There you go. You can see it there.
There we go. Oh, wow. That's nice. That's really nice. That's a really big book. It's a coffee table book, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to get all into Wrath of Khan a little bit later here today, but I want to start by getting some background information about you guys. And I'd love to ask the first question that I ask all my guests. John, Maria Jose, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek?
You want to go first?
No, you go first.
I'll go first. Okay. Well, there is no memory before Star Trek, actually. But I was born when Star Trek was on. Unfortunately, at the tail end of it, but I grew up with it. Certainly it was always on TV. It was, I was the perfect age for the animated show. I really came to it as a fan, a person who became, identified as a fan and thought of myself as a fan when I saw Wrath of Khan. So that's what really swept me into the whole world of it as a daily part of my life. But I had it before, I had the Mego play set and things like that. So I was certainly very aware of it. And I had liked it because I had liked science fiction. I had liked Planet of the Apes and things like that. So my brothers, in fact, used to play with my Planet of the Apes toys and my Star Trek, my Mego toys, and have them meet each other. And I would be upset about that because that was crossing universes. So that's where I was. But it was really Wrath of Khan that brought me. Seeing it with my dad on opening night at the Esquire Theater in Chicago. So that's really what.
And you didn't know it was opening night.
I didn't know it was opening night. I was going away for the summer for, like a summer camp. My parents had said, pick something for us to do together before you go. And so I picked E.T. with my mom. And I had picked Star Trek II with my dad. And it just happened to be opening night. And what a great night to go because the energy there in the theater and with the fellow. I mean, that's where I realized that there was a community of people and fans and a whole world around Star Trek. It wasn't just, a television show or like Planet of the Apes or things like that. So, then that was great. It's a great memory to have with my dad. I remember my dad very much. I remember my dad laughing at the, can I cook or can't I line, in the film. And, it's just a nice memory of my father both my parents are gone. So, so that was my introduction.
So I knew about Star Trek growing up because my brother would have on Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I knew it in passing. I was familiar with, Patrick Stewart playing Picard, but I never really sat down and watched it. It wasn't until I was, John and I were dating. I was working on my graduate paper and I would work on the paper in one room and he would catch up on Deep Space Nine in the other room. And I would hear it and I would hear like strange words like power rates. And I would poke my head out like, what is this? It sounds like, foreign language. And I'd be curious and I'd catch little clips and I was intrigued. And what was the first one he showed me? Star Trek 4?
Star Trek 4, which is the proper.
He has a specific order that he recommends the film.
Introduction film.
Yeah. When you're showing it to someone who's never watched Star Trek. So we watched Star Trek 4, then 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So 2 and then maybe 6?
Then 3.
Okay.
3. Yeah. Then 6.
And then the first show we watched was Deep Space Nine. But as soon as I started watching, I was hooked. And then I watched all of everything, every show, every episode, every series. So I was hooked right away.
When we got married and when they had asked, we were sitting down with a DJ. Yeah. I don't know if they even have DJs at weddings anymore, but we had a DJ at our wedding, and he asked what we wanted to walk into, and Mary Jo said the Voyager theme. So
that's when he knew.
That's when I knew she had come into the group.
Yeah, I was converted.
And John, I do have to ask officially, what is the proper order to watch the movies? What's the best way for a newbie to check them out?
Well, I think for a new person, I mean, I'm talking about somebody who really just has no conception of Star Trek, and you want to start with the movies rather than the TV shows. If I was doing the TV shows, I would just go in order. I would go in the order in which they were received. I think if you're introducing someone who's brand new, and maybe even a little hesitant about Star Trek, I think Star Trek 4 is a really great film to start with, because it's set in our, obviously in our own time. It's a story I think you can show to anybody of any age. It's a story that's understandable and relatable. The time travel isn't confusing. And then I would go into 2, because I think 2 is the best of the film. Not that there's no bad Star Trek, right? It's like pizza. Some pizza might be better than other pizza, but it's all good because it's pizza. There's no such thing as bad pizza. So, but I would then say do 2 and 3. Then they had saw 4, so they had sort of seen the collective there, the sort of the trilogy. And then I would say 6, just because that sort of follows more 4 than 5 does. 5 is sort of standalone, like 1 is. And then I would show them 1, and then I would show them the next gen in order. I think in terms of that, and not now that there was no Kelvin. That we've been married for 25 years, so there was no Kelvin universe back then. I don't know where I would have put that, but probably I would have put that after the next gen movies. So to have a better understanding of the Romulans and things like that I think you get from next gen.
Now, you both are sociologists, and that really is a big part of what this conversation is going to be about today as well. And for you, Maria Jose, I'd like to know what drew you down that path to want to go into sociology. And for you, John, I'm kind of curious, did Star Trek play a role in that?
I got into sociology because I found out I was going to be a business major in college. So I chose DePaul because it was one bus straight down, because we lived in Chicago. It was probably like a 20-30 minute bus ride. I chose that school because the high school I went to was so far. I had to take 3 buses to get there. It was like an hour and a half trip. And I chose that high school because they had a gymnastics program. So that's how my life is. Like, there's one thing I want. And so I make my choice based on that. So I wanted a short ride to school. So I chose DePaul, and I chose, I was going to be a business major. But then I found out that the business classes were downtown, and that would mean I'd have to take a bus and a train. And I was like, no, I'm done with a long commute. So my first semester, I took a sociology class, and the first day I liked it so much, I declared sociology my major, and I got a graduate degree in it because I liked sociology in school so much. I didn't want it to end. So I got a graduate degree. And when I finished graduate school, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was going to do cake decorating because I liked cake decorating. And I took a professional cake decorating course. And then John gets a job teaching sociology at the College of Lake County, which is we're out here in Lake County. And the dean asks, oh, do you know someone, because they're looking for people to teach. And so he's like, oh yeah, my fiance just got her graduate degree. And he comes home and he tells me that, like, you should go interview for this position. And I had no intention of teaching. I wasn't really going to even use my degree. And, anyway, I went and I got the job and I started teaching right away. He threw me into 3 classes and I loved it right away. So here I am 25 years later.
Well, that sounds like that.
That sounds so random.
But mine's a little more romantic, I think, than that. More than the bus ran that way. The bus went that direction in my life. I'm a weird person. It was actually the television show Welcome Back, Kotter, if anybody remembers that, John Travolta's first big show, that is still a huge part of my life. But I watched that. It was on when I was a kid. I was born in the late '60s, so I was 5, 6 years old when that show was on, and I loved the way he taught on that show. For those who are unfamiliar, it's a show about a teacher and his students, and he loved his students. He made it fun to learn, and I was like, why is I think it's very similar to anybody who grew up the Brady Bunch. You were kind of like, I wish my family did these kinds of exciting things, and so I was like, I wish my teachers were like this. And he was a social studies teacher, so that built very early into me a love of social studies and sociology. I think, however, what you asked about Star Trek is very true, because very, very early in my life, I loved Planet of the Apes. I grew up with that. I loved Star Trek. Of course, when Star Wars came along, the whole world changed. And Star Trek science fiction in general, and sociology are really the same thing. A good science fiction is sociology. It's a commentary on either now or the future. The difference, of course, is sociology uses the scientific method to, try to talk about groups and explain social phenomenon and social institutions. But it's really got the same goal, right? The goal of science fiction, good science fiction. I don't mean good, I mean like it's good. I mean just classic. What we mean by science fiction, it is meant to be a commentary on society, and deals with the same topics: race, religion, war, technology, politics, music. Maybe we haven't seen today's episode of Strange New Worlds yet, but music has always been a part of Star Trek, and it comments on these social elements. And so I think that may be why I don't know whether I liked sociology because I liked that element of science fiction, but I understood when I was a kid. I liked Planet of the Apes for two reasons. It had apes that talk, which really, other than that, what do you need? But I understood that it was about war, and I got that it was about race, and I understood that. I didn't understand it deeply or profoundly. I still don't, but I got that there was a moral there. I got that it was a fairy tale, and that you were supposed to take a moral away from it. And so I think that it's very easy to put science fiction and sociology together. And I think that the two, for me, have always been the same thing.
So, John, that actually is pretty interesting also. And you kind of gave a little bit of a definition of what sociology is, but for folks like me who are not as well versed in that area, and for plenty of my listeners also who might not know it, do you mind going a little bit more in depth about what sociology actually is and what that entails?
Sociology it's a science, sociology. It depends on the same scientific method that you would use in the natural sciences, except that its focus is on studying our lives within groups, primarily our life within institutions and the things that we use within those institutions. So a sociologist would study family, media, government, education, and these institutions that we build and how we group ourselves within those groups. But it might also study, religion or a religion. It might study the effect of the artifacts that we have, like social media, technology. It's really there. As long as two or more people are together, you can study it from a sociological point of view. The difference between psychology and sociology is that psychology leans a little more to the biological model. We lean more to the nurture, the nature-nurture debate. We lean more towards nurture in pure sociological. I mean, you can do sociobiology. I mean, there's all these sub areas of it. psychology tends to be more interested in the individual person. Now, they may be interested in how that individual person relates to other people, but in a pure sense, psychology is about the individual, and in an ideal or pure sense, sociology is about the group. So a sociologist never cares what you make. They may ask you how much you make, but what they want to do is add up what you make with what every other Star Trek fan makes and see, do Star Trek fans make more money than non-Star Trek fans? That kind of thing. It's about our lives within the groups that we have, and whether they're small groups, and you can do micro-sociology, which is the type what we call interactionist theory, or you do macro-level sociology, which is more like war, institutions, large-scale kind of issues. But what a sociologist does is it takes a look at where we live our lives. Most of us live our lives in groups, work groups, family groups, religion groups, online communities, fan groups. So a sociologist would have a hell of a lot to say. Today is the beginning of the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. When we're recording this, they would have a hell of a lot to say about the Star Trek convention, because lots of interesting groups are there. Besides the big group, right? There's the big group of Star Trek fans, but there's also cosplayers, which are different than non-cosplayers. There's people who are Berman era fans, when there are also people that are more, Kelvin universe or Kurtzman verse, whatever. We don't have a name for it yet, but the more modern TV shows, there are people who like both. There's different occupations to study at the convention, people who work there, the actors, the directors, and then the occupations of all the fans. There's just a lot of different things you could study at like what goes on at a Star Trek convention. How is it similar than a sports convention, than a American Sociological Association convention, than a plumbers convention? What similarities are there? What differences are there? Are there differences at a Star Wars convention than a Star Trek convention? Those are questions that a sociologist might ask. There's
two levels of analysis, two ways of viewing something. So if you were going to study crime, for example, you could look at these broad patterns like race, sex, class, education, region of the country. And so that gives you kind of these broad patterns to crime. But then you can look at a micro level analysis, and you can look at theories that cover like what was the relationship between, or the interaction between the offender and the victim on the day of the crime, like what took place. So you can look at it two different ways. And that's something that I enjoy about sociology. It covers everything under the sun, so you can never be bored with it. And there's just so many theories.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing, is like I was trying to look into it and get a little bit more of an understanding of what sociology is, but it feels like it is such a broad umbrella of what it can be. So maybe for the sake of our listeners, and also for me, because I could definitely use this here, let's try and kind of focus it a little bit more and put a microscope under it in terms of Star Trek. I know this is a thing that both of you guys do quite a lot. You do lectures about this. You've done it at Star Trek Las Vegas, I believe, also. So how do we relate Star Trek to sociology?
Well, I think with Star Trek, with anything like that, but certainly with Star Trek, you can do you could either do the sociology of Star Trek, or you could do the sociology through Star Trek. So, I mean, I think there's a difference. So,
make it more confusing, why don't you?
Yeah, I was going to do intertextual, extratextual, then I realized that I don't want to go. But you could look at the sociology messages within Star Trek itself. So, last week on Strange New Worlds, they dealt with war. They've dealt with memory this season. They dealt with overpopulation on the original series. What were you going to say?
Oh, loss.
Loss. Yeah, that's been a big theme this year on Strange New Worlds. Loss and connection. If you go back to the original show, they dealt with racism, and they dealt with overpopulation. They dealt with, at the time, the Vietnam War in particular. They dealt with that. Next Generation dealt with globalization through the Borg, right? The Borg are scary because that's globalization. That's why they were created. It's during that era, and the fears people had of a world where we were all linked together technologically, and that's all beginning back then. You've got a wonderful episode in Next Generation that deals with language, Darmok, right, which is just one of the great episodes of Star Trek. Voyager deals with healthcare. In the HMO episode that they had, the evil HMO company episode that they had. And so Star Trek has within it, all the shows have sociological messages within them, themes within them. And so you could look at Star Trek and study, you could use it as a way to understand the real world, REAL, through the real world, REEL, right? Through the fake world of Star Trek, although it's real to us, the fake world of Star Trek, you could use that to understand real world issues. So that's sort of, that's the sociology through Star Trek. But you could also do the sociology of Star Trek, which is what is the real world effect of Star Trek. So to study things like Star Trek fans, how has Star Trek influenced people? How has it influenced technology? MP3s were created because of Star Trek. The inspiration for MP3s came for Star Trek. We often hear about the cell phone, and Martin Cooper being influenced by Star Trek. So there's real world technologies. I mean, I don't think Steve Jobs called the iPad because that's all they could think of, right? I mean, it existed on Star Trek. It was called Pad. I mean, and it looks the same, right? I mean, it's the same thing. We could talk about the technological effects of Star Trek, the social effects of Star Trek, the inspirational effects of Star Trek, and look at how that works. We spend a lot of time studying the making of it, because we're very interested in what happens when artists come together. I also have a degree in humanities for whatever that's worth, but I have a degree, and that's a nice combination, I think, of sociology and humanities. But it's taking a look at how artists and technicians, when they come together, how do they produce Star Trek despite what always exists? Budget limitations, time limitations, technology limitations, censorship, whether that's from the studio side of things in the days of the early Star Trek, or whether it's censorship in terms of the rules of Star Trek, what they used to call the Roddenberry box, right? And the rules that Roddenberry had laid down for Star Trek. So we're very interested in that, and what we like to do is we like to have the credits come alive. It irritates the hell out of me that they fast forward credits, or you can shove it off to the side, or you can skip credits, because these are the people, all of them, not just the actors, and maybe in some ways, as important or more important than actors sometimes are the people behind the scenes who make it possible for the actors to do what they do, and for us as fans to enjoy it. And we live in a society now where credits don't mean anything, right? It's not our most serious problem, but we certainly live in a society where where the whole streaming world is geared around skipping credits. And what we want people to do is to be able to watch the credits of Star Trek II and go, oh, I know what that person did. I know what that person did. I know who that person is. And to say beyond not only the actors, who of course make a very important contribution, but also cinematographers and special effects artists and designers and carpenters and gaffers, and that was really in the spirit of how we wrote the book. Was we wanted to focus on everyone's contributions to it, and how amazingly you can come up with a piece of genuine art, or even just a really entertaining movie or television show, and yet people were able to do it despite whatever limitations they faced.
Well, I want to take it, like you said, from the real world to the real world for a second here, and again, just kind of even putting the microscope down even further into the lens of Star Trek. I'd like to talk, I guess, about who are maybe the best ambassadors for the ideas of sociology and the exploration of sociology, because to me, it feels like Spock and Data really stand out as those types of characters. Maria Jose, can you kind of elucidate a little bit more on like how those two characters especially really relate to the pursuits of sociology?
Well, especially because they're outsiders. Spock serving on a starship, and he's surrounded by humans. And so he's an outsider looking in. Same thing with Data, being an android wanting to be human. So they're great at doing that. And then we can see how they're struggling or what challenges they have. And one of the earliest episodes I show students, I don't show them the whole episode, but I show them clips from The Enemy Within. So Kirk, because of the transporter accident, he's split into two. There's the good Kirk and the evil Kirk. And at first, he's horrified by his evil side and doesn't want to take him back. So he's struggling with this idea like this is the ugly side of me. I don't like it. I don't want it. And then Spock makes a comment about, what we have here is, we can study what makes a person good, what makes a person evil. And I use this for a class it's on deviant behavior. And I think the message that you have here is that you need both sides. So there might be aspects about yourself that you don't like, but it makes you who you are. And so for Kirk, that makes him a very strong captain, because his good side, he can't make command decisions, that might cost somebody their life. But that darker, evil side can do that. So Spock tells him, like, look, you need that. You need to be combined. This side makes you who you are. And McCoy also has a good role in that because he points out, it's not ugly, it's human. And so I think that's a good message for how we as humans, like, we don't have to tamper. If you think about in the past, lobotomies, forced sterilization of a whole swaths of people, especially people who were considered mentally ill, forced sterilization, eugenics, that we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't tamper with ourselves, that you could be getting rid of some of the good when you're getting rid of what you think is the bad. It's kind of like the hygiene hypothesis, the idea that you need exposure to germs to have a strong immune system. And so you need the bad to have the good. I like to show him that. And then I show him a clip. It's actually an interview with Ricardo Montalban on of all things QVC. And he's asked by Bob Bowersox what it's like to play the villain. And I love his answer because he says, I don't play a villain. I play a man who, because of circumstances have brought him to this point where he does villainous things. So the idea is that Khan doesn't see himself as evil. Khan sees himself as righteous for going after Kirk. And it's a good example of how people who are deviant don't go around thinking I'm a deviant person. They don't go around thinking I'm an evil person. They feel justified in what they're doing. So I like to use Star Trek as a great jumping off point for discussions in class. And those are two examples I show very early on, like the first week or two.
Yeah, I think Matthew, your that idea, and Mary Jo used the word outsider, which I think is a great word. That those are always the characters because they can do a commentary on they can be the it's like stand-up comedians, yeah. Right? I always ask my students at the start of the semester to become one of three things. They could either be Nemo from Finding Nemo, and they need to jump out of the tank because you can't be swimming along and study what you're swimming along necessarily. It's more objective to be outside the tank. You're supposed to, like Nemo jumps outside the tank, to jump outside the tank and to see the tank. And then, or to be Neo from the Matrix, which he does the same thing, right? He takes a pill and he sees the world for the way it really is because a sociologist can't be a participant. Now, you may do participant observation and that kind of, but a sociologist is supposed to be an outsider. And the third example I give him is be somebody like, Lenny Bruce or Mencia or Brian Regan or Jerry Seinfeld or Richard Pryor. Be a stand-up comedian, because stand-up comedians, we usually laugh because they're pointing out things that we should have recognized, but we're swimming along in those waters and we don't recognize. And I think in Star Trek, those characters like Spock in the original show, Data in Next Generation, on Voyager, it was probably the Doctor, I would argue, be the character. On Deep Space Nine, it was Odo. And on Enterprise, it was, I think, primarily to Paul and Phlox a little bit. They kind of shared duties there, maybe Phlox a little more. And then the show went on more to Paul. But certainly on those shows, the original, the sort of Berman era, Roddenberry era Star Trek, there was that concept of having an outsider who could make commentary on humanity. And I guess I would throw Quark in there too. I think Quark and Odo functioned in those ways where they would make commentary on what humanity was about. And that's the function of a sociologist.
I even put that in my an announcement to students at the start of the semester, that I hope that they'll be like Spock and will approach things in a very curious way, wanting to understand all the theories that we're going to cover. We look at it it's like a buffet. There's going to be some things that you might like, some things you don't like, but to try to have that kind of like openness to just want to, explore what it is. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it or accept it, but just look at it and try to understand what that idea is saying.
And I think that's one of the big differences between Spock on the original Star Trek, the Leonard Nimoy version of Spock, and the newer version of Spock, the Ethan Peck version of Spock, is that Spock, maybe because they're playing it because he's so young on that show, I guess, he does not make that kind of commentary very frequently, once in a while. But he doesn't have the assuredness of older Spock yet. He doesn't have a little bit of that experience, so as to be able to sort of sit back and say, okay, because I think when we're younger, we're a little more like, well, my idea is the right idea, right? Like my way of life is the right, because you understand that you don't have but as you get older, you realize you don't know anything, really. All you have is wisdom, which is different than, and usually wisdom just means patience. So I think that's an interesting dynamic, because I was trying to think of on Discovery, who's the outsider? And that's a little hard to say. Saru, maybe? But then they took away what made Saru very different, right? Which was the fear aspect of the character. And Strange New Worlds, Una, maybe?
I mean, I'd argue that maybe on Discovery, they're kind of all almost the outsiders. That was kind of like a little bit of the exploration of what the show was last season, especially with them trying to come to terms with many of their own emotions and that kind of thing. So they're all kind of feeling outside in different ways. I'm thinking the same thing now. It's like, it's pretty big, isn't it? in Disco. So I know that all three of us are toy and merchandise collectors as well. And I do want to put that under the lens of sociology as well. Now, I've seen you guys appear on The Toys That Made Us, and it's one of my favorite shows also. I'm waiting for more episodes. Ryan Volkweiss, get on that, please. But something that I read you guys had said, I don't know if it was on the show or if maybe it was in an article, but I believe it was in relation to G.I. Joes. And the idea of it was essentially the gendering of action figures and the gendering of toys. And I feel like that is a very sociological construct to talk about in the world of toy collecting. So I'd love if you guys can kind of break down what that means. And how that relates to a property like Star Trek, which I feel has been, for the most part, really fairly gender neutral, even if the merchandise didn't always lean that way.
You want to?
Well, when you brought up G.I. Joe, it's great. It's fun to look at over time how the action figure has changed to reflect the standard of beauty at the time. So you can see that he gets more buff, he gets more muscular. And when you look at what's going on in the culture, when you look at what popular culture is popular, you'll see that change in physique. So same thing happened with Star Wars figures. If you look at the original Star Wars figures, you look at Luke, you look at Leia and Han, they're slim. And then when you look at it's Power of the Force, correct? Power of the Force line in the 1990s, you see them like really muscular. And Leia as well. You look at her biceps, her quadriceps, she's muscular. And then what's going on in the culture? You've got, especially the 80s, Rambo and Rocky, and Schwarzenegger. And you got, I used to watch, it was called WWF wrestling. And then they had Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. So you had wrestling was very popular. He-Man was popular. So you see those characters are reflecting that. They made the action figures more muscular to reflect what's going on in popular culture. So certainly you can see from the toy line changes in the culture, what we consider to be attractive, what is considered desirable.
When you're talking about toys are the main mechanism by which kids learn, right? So one of the worst things we do is take away the toys in school. So every kid is different, of course, but kids don't necessarily mind. They might mind the idea of going to school till they see there's all these toys in this classroom when when they go to preschool or whatever. But then, once you start getting to third grade or fourth grade, they start removing all that. They start removing the toys from the classroom and that element from the classroom. And so then it becomes a job and school becomes, something else. Kids learn through their toys. We know that from theories as, Jean Piaget, but any parent knows that, right? The kids play with toys. It's also important when kids play with toys because it's not only a socialization experience, it's really one of the few places they have any control, right? So a kid's told when to get up, got to go to school. Here's what you're eating. They might be told what to wear, but when I'm playing with my Star Wars toys or my Planet of the Apes toys when I'm a little kid, I get to decide what happens to those characters. I'm the author. I'm the director. I'm the creator of the universe of those figures. And so there's a lot of creativity that goes into that and a lot of attachments. So toys are, there's a reason you can go back to Egypt and there's toys, and they look like toys. They look like we would recognize them and you go, that's a doll. They're not 3D rendered, laser etched, dolls, but they're dolls. And there's a reason that nearly every society has toys. And part of it is that's the window for the child to the adult world. And so even if it's something, now you could play something practical like easy bake ovens. And so you're teaching a kid how to cook. But even if you're playing something fantastic, you're learning values. So when you play Kirk versus Scrooge with your Playmates action figures, you're learning what a good person is in our society, defined in our society, versus what a bad person is in our society. You're learning values, and that includes gender roles, right? Certainly part of that. Star Trek's toy history is really just the fastest in and of itself is a fascinating history. It's really one of the windows that we know that Star Trek is back in the 1970s. The Mego toy line is an enormously, well-received money-making line. The line that's based mostly on the animated show, at least inspired by the animated show. And that's one of the keys that people say, oh, this thing is not this is not a dead franchise. This is not the only time that's happened. In the 70s, Lone Ranger toys. I still don't know the explanation for that, but Lone Ranger toys by Gabriel were huge sellers. And that was a show that hadn't been on. And there was an animated thing, but it wasn't very popular. And yet that spawned a Lone Ranger film in the late 1970s. And so that's part of the reason Star Trek came back when they see the sales of books and toys and so on. But it's nice. Star Trek has sort of always had, really toys for everybody and collectibles at various price points. You can buy a $30,000 Enterprise if you want to, or you could buy a $1.99 Enterprise if you want to, so it's kind of nice. And the very, very early Mego line had, Uhura in it, which was unusual to include a female character in what would they conceptualized as a boys toy line. And I think it important, it's within a mainstream toy line to have an African-American female action figure. That was a big deal, and had to be specially made. It wasn't like they could use a mold from, you could use Spock's body on, McCoy's body, and you just had to change the head. It took an expense to do that. And I think that says something about Star Trek fans and what they're receptive about, and Star Trek's sort of place with those issues.
Now, you two have a pretty amazing collection of Star Trek stuff. I know right now as we're doing this interview, you're in the process of a move, so unfortunately we can't look at it all. But can you guys just tell us, let's say maybe about some of the more odd things you guys have in your collection?
My favorite is the marshmallow dispenser from Kraft. I love anything that is unique. I love things that are practical too. So when you can combine your love of a franchise with something practical that you can use in your everyday life, I love that. So one of the small things I have here are Star Trek paper clips. So why use just boring paper clips when you can have the Enterprise and the Delta Shield?
That's amazing.
Just things like that, like the Star Trek cookie cutters. Star Trek, used to have the cookie jars above our refrigerator. So I love where you can just bring in, elements of things you love just in your regular daily life that you could have scattered around your house. So it's not like we have it only in one room. It's just like everywhere.
And then we have, I still have my original Mego play set from the 70s. So that's nice. Fun. This is special to me. And my original figures, we like to collect, as Maria Jose said, little oddball kinds of things, in addition to the action figures and that sort of thing. Playmates is one of my loves, the original Playmate line, which I thought was really well done. And I loved how, it was very different than I also collect Star Wars too. We do both. But, the problem with Star Wars lines is you get Luke with only slight differences, but Playmates didn't do that. When you got your 8 or 9 Kirks, they were all completely different. He was in his, a piece of the action outfit in one figure. He was in, his, Where No Man Has Gone Before outfit. I mean, they were always, very rarely did they ever do the same figure, but only a little bit different. And so they had a really wonderful, expansive line. So did Diamond Select Toys. They did really great, a little more like for collectors, I think, than for playing with. They were a little heavier, bigger, 7 inches, most of them. But that was a very diverse lines. Yeah, and a great diverse line. They gave us figures, Nurse Agawa, who had never existed before. As a figure. So we like collecting that. But I like collecting the lunch boxes, food items. That's a big thing for us. So, difficult to keep, but we take pictures of them. So, we ate a lot of Kellogg Eggo waffles when Star Trek 2009 came out because they had Eggo waffles with Star Trek on them, and we wanted to get one of every one. You can't keep them. I guess you probably could put shellac on it. I don't know what the science of that would be. But I like collecting soda, anything that has to do with soda. So glasses. Really, some of my favorite collectibles are the Star Trek 3 Taco Bell glasses. Because I remember riding my bike to Taco Bell and saving up the 79 cents or whatever it was to get a soda so I could get the glass. And what was cool is the glasses came out before the film. And one of the glasses has the destruction of the Enterprise on it. So you were spoiled by the Taco Bell glasses, So we like things like that, not really, we don't have a lot of high end, very expensive pieces, things like that. And then we love collecting vinyl too. So I think I have almost any Star Trek and or actor, produced vinyl that exists. I love that. And one of my favorites is the Wrath of Khan had a single. They released a single. So it's a 7-inch 45 record, small one that they sent to radio stations to play the Star Trek 2 theme, which seems more appropriate for Star Trek 3 because they did like a disco type of thing with that. But they did that with Star Trek 2. So I love stuff like that.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a pay what you want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Have you ever watched a YouTube video and said you wish you could do what they were doing? Whether it's the filming, the production, the editing. Maybe you listen to your favorite podcast and you wondered how they put that show together, how they got that great sound quality, what gear they use, how much does it cost to get started? Or maybe you checked out a video or read a book about one of your favorite entrepreneurs and it made you say, I want to live that life. I want to do what they do. Then check out my podcast, Toys and Tech of the Trade. I'm Rich Butler, and I've been making podcasts for almost 2 decades, speaking with experts across all fields to get to the bottom of the hows and whys of their achievements. Each week, I sit down with these amazing people who have carved their own path in life and share the gadgets, the gear, and the tech that they rely on to create their content, the methods that they use to run their business, and the habits and trends that are part of their daily routine and their way of life. And all of that, of course, gets put together to make them successful. We pull back the curtain on the process to help you understand what these people do differently so that you can draw inspiration and get ideas and be inspired so that you can take action today. This podcast is inspiring, educational, it's enlightening, and most of all, it's a lot of fun. I want you to join me on this journey so that you can use the tools and advice shared in this podcast to level up your business or creative endeavors, giving you all the tips, tactics, and tools so that you can transform what you're doing from a side hustle into a full-time lifestyle where you can collect a paycheck for doing what you love. Check out Toys and Tech of the Trade wherever you listen to podcasts and check out the RageWorks Network at RageWorksNetwork.com for more info on this podcast and all of the many other great shows that we have on the RageWorks Podcast Network. That's Toys and Tech of the Trade with some assembly required.
All right, so John, Maria Jose, let's start talking about your new book here, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, The Making of the Classic Film. And this seems like an obvious question here. And there's the book one more time, which looks beautiful, by the way. It looks really great.
Never see the back. That's the first showing of the back there, right there.
Oh, that looks awesome.
Anybody's seen the back. So there you go. Yeah, really nice.
And so, I think this is kind of like an obvious question here, which I want to ask you guys, like, why write the book in the first place? But I think the nuance that I want to kind of get here with you guys is, this is a topic that has been covered so heavily already by a lot of other authors, by videos, by documentarians. And I don't say this as a negative. I say it from the perspective of so many folks kind of tend to stop dead in the tracks with an idea if they think someone's already done it. But you guys had this idea, you kept going forward. So what made you say that you can do this and contribute something different or never before seen to the Star Trek universe?
One of the themes that we have is the idea that art thrives on limitations. And so one of the things I'm so impressed with is the amount of attention and planning that was put into this before they even started shooting. So Nicholas Meyer and Gain Rusher would spend time, like hours, walking through, deciding what they were going to do shot for shot, how they were going to do it before even starting. So I think Nicholas Meyer said it like before the meter was running in terms of money and time, they were already planned so that they knew what they were doing and they didn't have to like change something on the fly or change something later because that would cost money. Today we hear about shows having to do, or movies having to do reshoots and having to delay something. And here Nicholas Meyer, in such a short time frame, with the script and getting ready for production, just putting so much thought and planning into it so that it would go well. That I'm so impressed with that.
We approached the book, I think, differently. We approached it as a scientific endeavor. In other words, we didn't believe anything that we had been told before, because there are also a lot of myths about Star Trek II. One of the myths that's it's in official things at the time is that it was never a television movie. And never. And you hear people say it was never a television movie, and they're on documentaries. It's never a television movie. It was a television movie. We have the memos from, we didn't say anything in the book unless we had the proof. And so we were very lucky and fortunate, both because of the kindness of fellow fans. We were able to get a hold of every version of the script that ever existed. We also had access to every memo that is known to exist. There may be some that people have privately that aren't in collections, and so we really approached this as let's strip everything away. There's never been a making of book before, and we're going to start this from scratch. Of course, there was a book made at the time by Alan Asherman, a really wonderful book, Star Trek II, the making of the film. And there's a really great Cinefantastique article that was done by Kay Anderson that was amazingly just beautiful piece of journalism and research. So we relied on the things that had been done before that were done well, and we rejected the things that were, either, I would say, PR-ish. And we also we felt we needed to tell stories that had never been told before. So we tell the story of the Khan baby in here. That's never been told in its full story before. Who is the Khan baby? Why was the Khan baby actually edited out of the film? Was it Khan's kid? Was Yalcum Khan's kid? The novelization has a very fascinating story because there was concerns about releasing the novel. Because it would reveal the ending. And so there were lots and lots. We figured if we went through here and we were going through all this material going, ooh, right? So we found out what happened to Khan's wig. Khan's wig makes another appearance in another thing, not Star Trek related, but Nicholas Meyer related. And so anything where we were like, ooh, wow, that's fascinating. We figured fellow fans would love to know about that. So just to interject, another common question we get is, was Ricardo Montalban's chest real? It's real. We explain why it's real. We have the definitive proof that it's real. And we were also really fortunate. We did interviews with Nick Meyer, of course, was very generous with his time. Laura Banks, who was on set with Ricardo Montalban every time Ricardo, really, in every scene Ricardo is in, Laura is there.
Yep.
So she was a wonderful
on the show
resource.
As well, in fact.
Yeah, a really wonderful resource for the Reliant, the whole Reliant world and what that was like filming that. We also got to talk with Ken Ralston, which was wonderful, and to hear about the interviews, what it was like to do the effects during those days. And Ken's just a great person, let alone a genius, just a really real genius. But we also talked with people like Steve Sansweet, who Star Wars fans may know, who plays a role in the Star Trek II story. We spoke with Leonard Nimoy's family, with Julie Nimoy contributed to the book. She was on set. She was Leonard's assistant and a production assistant during the show, during Star Trek II. She was there when they filmed the death sequence. She was the only one with her father in the car back and forth every day, making Star Trek II. So she gave us some really wonderful insights, as did Ricardo Montalban's family. She passed away the day after she contributed to the book. A wonderful woman named Anita Montalban, who was one of Ricardo's daughters. The Montalban family is doing a great deal to keep his legacy and his activism alive. And she told us details no one knows about Ricardo and his relationship with Khan. And so we really think there's an awful lot in the book that, because we approached it as nothing is sacred. We need to have, there needs to be a memo, there needs to be an interview, there needs to be something where we can hook this onto before we state it in the book. And we tried to tell stories that weren't told before. So each chapter deals with a different aspect of the production. So there's a chapter on the cinematography, a chapter on stunts, a chapter on hairdressing and makeup. Wardrobe. And there's a lot in here of the script. So fans for the first time will be able to read the actual script pages are in here of the original death scenes as they progressed, as they changed from Soward's version of it through Nicholas Meyer's version. And fans have never really been able to see that before, like that, most fans. So we're really excited. We think it's got a lot in there that fellow fans had never seen before. And as Mary Jo said, we were, just impressed by this amazing team of people. And we offset, everybody gets a little Starfleet personnel file. And people have never, not necessarily knew were associated with Star Trek too, like Judy Elkins, who is just very, very generous. She worked at ILM. She's responsible for the lasers, for the phasers and so on. And she went on to have a really important career in Star Trek, even becoming a visual effects supervisor on Deep Space Nine. But she contributed a lot to some of our favorite early, ILM movies. And just, she really walked us through, how do you do that scene where the Reliant is burning into the Enterprise? How is that done? And so to have her and Ken explain that to us, then we explain that to fellow fans. We think hopefully fans will love it.
I really love that approach to how you guys did this, with just basically coming into it as if it's like a fresh thing, never before discussed. That's a really smart way to do a biography. And I'm really excited even more now to check this book out in hand. But I got to ask you guys, you kind of just told us a little bit about it, but you found a lot of these old resources that probably nobody has ever seen before. What was it like for you as fans to come upon this stuff and be reading it and being like, we're the first ones to ever find out this information? Like that's got to be the coolest thing in the world.
Oh, I'll tell you, when we were able, we had about 15 years ago, Nicholas Meyer was very generous and gave us access to his to scanning his materials at the University of Iowa Library, where he has a really wonderful. Anybody who's interested in any of Nick Meyer's films, because he of course did a lot of great work beyond Star Trek, Day After. Just amazing stuff. And even things that aren't necessarily film related, but more as books, as his Sherlock Holmes books and things like that. The University of Iowa has just a beautiful collection of his materials. When we saw those, there was a lot of contact sheets. So for people aren't familiar with what those are, they're little tiny, images. And what happens is the studio or the actor or whoever it is gets, they put these contact sheets and they're like, yes, that's a good picture, not such a great picture. But in there are pictures, you're like, what is this? What is this photo? For example, the pictures of the Khan baby on set. And so you're like, oh my gosh. So there was a lot of that even 15 years ago. But then when Paramount opened its vaults to us, and we got to see the photos. We were really excited. They had photos of them filming the Genesis explosion, which was done in an auditorium. And they had those photos. And we had never seen those. Also, they had photos of the premiere. And some of those are in here. So you'll see Merritt Buttrick at the premiere. And the premiere with fans, like him handing out stuff to fans. And to find out Denise Ikuda was at the premiere of Mike and Denise Ikuda fame, it's a photo of her. And then now we didn't include that in the book, but to see things like that as fans, to see fellow fans, all the 82 fans, 1982 fans, there is just so much there. One of the great pictures in the book that we loved that's in there, there's a couple. One is you see them bringing the sand in to film Ceti Eel because it was all real sand, right? So you see what it looks like. We walk you through how that set was built. And you see the wood underneath it and the almost like Tyvek-like material that's on top of it for them to walk on. And then the wood that's placed on top of that. And then the dirt that's being, you see the construction, team bringing that dirt in. And then one of our favorite photos is you'll see the photos of the outside of the bridge, because the bridge is literally a round encapsulated set. And it looks almost like a UFO on the set. You could see where it was modular and they could take away pieces of it and film. And you could just see what a challenge filming on that set had to be. And the constant tinkering with moving pieces of it to be able to film the way that they needed to film. So all that's in there. And those are all photos we don't think have been seen before outside of, Paramount.
All right, well, I think I got to ask you guys now, because you kind of said this a few times, the Khan baby. Now, I don't want to give away everything here, but I did plan on asking you guys about something that maybe this is connected to, because I've heard a story about Saavik in the movies and some things that happened and didn't happen to her. And that includes not just Wrath of Khan, but things that would have happened in Star Trek 4, things that could have happened in Star Trek 6. So as Star Trek experts, and also relating this here back to Wrath of Khan, can you kind of flex a little bit with my fans here and talk to me about what you guys know about Saavik that a lot of us might not know?
Well, Saavik started as was in early drafts of this script. It was actually created by Jack Sowers, and but very different. Saavik was a male Vulcan, and pretty Spock-like, except he was a full Vulcan. And he is sort of Kirk's in the first version of the script. He is Kirk's kind of, Spock is killed very early in the very first version of it. Basically, the Reliant fight that happens in the movie as we know it is where Spock dies in the original version of the script. And then really after that, it's Saavik, and Saavik and Kirk together with one of them. Very different story though. Khan, they go out into the desert. Khan, his wife is alive. I mean, there's a lot of differences in it. There's a one-on-one fight between Kirk and Khan, which carries all the way through, by the way, until even a Nicholas Meyer version. There is a one-on-one fight with Khan, but Nick wisely edits that out of his later scripts, because then we get the Khan scream, which is great. But Kirk is brought to trial by David. He's going to be executed by the rebels who are fighting against Khan. Has kind of taken over parts of Starfleet. I mean, it's very Tyrell and parts of Starfleet, and they're going to use this Genesis device as a bomb to start wars. And David is leading this rebellion against it, and it's a very different story. So Saavik starts out very, very different. Not just because of the gender, but because much more like what we would think of what Kolinahr Spock would have looked like, right? Then Saavik gets changed to a female by Samuel Peoples' version of the script, which is just there's no Khan in there. It's a completely different. Just he went off on a totally different track on two aliens, and but they kept a certain elements of each of these as Nick Meyer sort of pieced together really his script, and Saavik was one of them. So that's sort of half Romulan, half Vulcan. That's coming in like in the People's version of things. The character of Saavik was always meant to replace Spock. Spock was not coming back for Star Trek 3, never was going to come back for Star Trek 3. Only came back as things progressed and they realized, can you do Star Trek without Spock? And also the changing of the casting, I think, affected that a little bit too. The need to change the casting of it. But yes, Saavik was in Star Trek 4. She was going to become pregnant in 3. You would not know that though till 4. She was going to. That's why she stayed behind in 4. So that is scripted by Harve Bennett, and it was filmed. So that exists. With of course Spock's baby, but they didn't want to tell Spock. They didn't want to tell Spock that because of him going through his readjustment period. And so she stayed behind to be with Amanda, and therefore they would have had they kept that in the movie, they would have had to brought Saavik back. I mean, how do you not deal with Spock's baby? I mean, that would have been a huge thing that needed to be dealt with in Star Trek 5, right? Now they did bring Saavik back for Star Trek 6, but they renamed her Valeris. That was originally Saavik. And two things kind of happened there. One was Gene Roddenberry was not happy with that idea of one of the main characters being the saboteur. And at that point, a beloved character. But really more the reason was they could not get Kirstie Alley, who, by the way, always wanted to do it. We got to chat a little bit with her before she passed away. She always wanted to do Saavik in every version. She wanted to do it in Star Trek 3. She wanted to do it when they were going to have her on as kind of like a joke with Kelsey Grammer in the episode of Next Gen where he plays Captain Bateman. That was supposed to be Saavik standing next to him. And she wanted to play him in her in Star Trek 6. It was always just a function of scheduling and or other practical matters that stopped that. And I think Nick Meyer did not want to recast Saavik again. And so that's where they created the character of Valeris from. So, and Saavik, of course, has a life in the comics where they bring back Zahn. Zahn and her are betrothed. So the Zahn character, who was meant to be the replacement of Spock in the motion picture, is the betrothed of Saavik, who was meant to be the replacement of Spock in Star Trek 2. So that was kind of clever. DC Comics did that. So really fascinating character, but really always meant to be to keep the three elements of logic, emotion, and the balancer between those, right? McCoy's the emotion, Spock is the logic, and Kirk is the balancer who incorporates both of those. And they knew that was part of the special sauce of the original Star Trek. And they wanted to keep that, and that's what Saavik's function is.
I know you guys probably cover this in the book as well, because there's so much awesome stuff in there, but I'm just curious if you guys address the Chekov Khan meeting that happens early in the film.
Yes, we do. The reality is they didn't think about that. But I think that there's other reasons though too. One is that Walter Koenig kind of had the reputation, right, of being the screamer, right? He had such a great he was really good. It's meant to be for, I mean, that's not an easy thing to do, right? I think crying and giving a believable scream, these types of things are not easy for actors to do. And I think they realized that they wanted Koenig. The other thing is, it's also the other reality is it's just a whole, the final script is very much a patchwork of all the other scripts, even though it's an original script. I mean, Nick Meyer wrote Star Trek II as we know it, but it is pieced together from Jack B. Soward's, Samuel Peoples, all these other iterations. So one of the very early versions of the script, I should say this, all the versions of the script had Chekov with Terrell. It didn't always have that Terrell and Chekov met Khan. And that's really why Chekov was with Terrell. It was just this carryover. They just kept that element throughout all these different versions. The other, of course, the reality of it is Chekov was on the Enterprise. He was just in the lower decks. And Walter Koenig has the joke of, he was in the bathroom or something, that kind of thing. But
But you can see, like the last time we see Chekov, McCoy comes and checks on him, after the eel has been removed from him. But you can see in the Genesis cave, they use close-up shots, but when you look at the wide shots, you can see Chekov is right there. He's kind of just like off to the side. I think we show that.
Yeah, we show that in there. That's one of the neat little, because that always is one of the things that the two big things with Chekov and the I think Wrath of Khan is how did Khan know who he was, and the other thing is why did everybody leave him in the cave by himself as he's bleeding out from his ear and in shock? And that isn't. He is actually in the cave scene. He's in the Garden of Eden section of it. He is with them. He's off to the side, and in fact, in one of the sequences, as McCoy gets up and goes over to check on him as he's sort of laying off to the side, Saavik and David have a little conversation, and Saavik calls him a bastard in the script. He says, "Oh, you're a bastard, right? I mean, you're his kid, but they weren't married." And he's like, a better way of saying that. That's sort of, they have a little discussion with it, because there was very much meant to be a romance between the two of them, and all of that kind of got little moments that hinted at it, and all of that got taken out.
You could really see that in those photos and that contact sheets. You can see that the way Kirstie Alley and Merrick Buttrick were on set. You can see that as well. And then if you see the key art for Wrath of Khan, there's that image of David with a knife at Kirk's throat. So that's explained as well in the book, because that was cut.
Yeah, we tried to explain as many of the sort of mysteries, and we can't tell you what the Khan glove means, because the only one who knows that won't ever tell people what it means. But we try to solve the other production mysteries.
That's really cool. I mean, yeah, you guys really did some serious detective work here. And one last time, John, if you want to hold up the book as well, that'd be awesome. But how can folks find this book? Where can they find it? And yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So how can folks pick up Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan?
Well, it is available for anybody who's interested. It's available for pre-order now, really anywhere and everywhere. It's published by Titan Books. So, and it's an official Paramount release. So you can get it at Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, through previews if you get your books at the comic store. There's also a Kindle, a digital version of it if you wanted a more digital version rather than a hard copy of it. About 100 lucky fans got an early copy at San Diego Comic-Con, but it's coming out September 5th to help celebrate Star Trek, right around Star Trek Day. And we had hoped to have it out last year for the 40th, but there was a lot of challenges with the pandemic with doing research. Obviously, a lot of libraries were closed. Besides all the other tragedies with it, it made travel and so on, and obviously a little more difficult. So the book got pushed back a little bit because of that, but we're thrilled that finally. The book actually took longer to write than the movie took to make.
I'm not surprised by that.
Well, partially, everything's scattered, right? Some of the materials are in the hands of fans. Some have been lost to time. This is one of the reasons we really believe in what Titan is doing, and in going back to the early Star Trek movies and giving them a sort of new making ofs, because we're losing one of while we wrote this book, Nichelle Nichols passed away, and Kirstie Alley passed away, and we lost so many people before. There's nobody in the film. One of the people that's on the film crew is Kathy Colton, who fans of David Lynch and Twin Peaks know. She's the log lady, but she plays a very important role on the camera crew of Star Trek II. She passed away a few years ago. To be able to have talked to her about her memories of this, because usually when people talk to Kathy Colton, it's about Twin Peaks, it's about David Lynch, it's about her film, her career that direction. And so we're losing so many people who made these films 40 and 30 years ago that we really wanted to be a tribute to them. And we did make the book a tribute to those who we've lost. All the great actors, so many of the actors are gone. B.B. Bish and Paul Winfield and Merritt Buttrick and Ricardo Montalban and Leonard Nimoy and James Doohan and Nichelle Nichols. I mean, just so many of the people that you recognize who it would have been fascinating to get their view on it 40 years later, So we like this idea. They've done books on the motion picture and Titan and First Contact and things like that. So we're glad they're going back. And some of these films never got making of book. Star Trek 3 never got a making of book. Star Trek 4 never got a making of book. 5, William Shatner had a kind of a personal diary sort of making of book. But Star Trek 6 never had a making of book. So I think from the fan, that the nice thing about books, I think, versus say Blu-ray features or whatever, is that you can really study the images, in the book. And that's why, with these coffee table books. So there's a lot of great pictures. Just so many we're excited for fans to see. Even one of B.B. Bish alternate haircuts. I mean, just things like that. That's just like, when I saw that, I got so excited.
That's stuff we're going to make them buy the book if they want to learn more about that stuff. Can't give away everything here today, John and Maria.
Yes.
But again, for folks who want to follow you guys also, is there a way that they can keep up the tabs of what you guys are doing?
Sure. You can follow us just on Facebook. If you look for just John Tenuto, you'll see the cover of the book. It's easy. And we share that. It's we talk about different projects we're doing or books we're working on, things like that.
Right, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much today for coming by and telling us about the book. I'm very excited to get into my hands as well, because it seems like, it's in the number one here. It's being written by 2 real serious hardcore fans. And also the fact that you guys, you really did your homework with this. So I'm very, very excited to see what new stuff you guys have dug up, because today was a little sneak preview. Seeing what's actually in that book, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. So thank you guys again for coming by, and thank you for doing all that hard work putting this thing together.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us. We loved it. Thanks.
And that was our chat with John and Maria Jose Tenuto, talking all about their brand new Star Trek Wrath of Khan book. And if you guys want to pick it up, once again, there will be links for it in the show notes of this episode. And I highly urge you guys to check this out. After we were done recording, they even showed me a few other things we didn't talk about on air. And I got to tell you guys, wow, I'm legitimately blown away. I know you're going to be blown away too, because some of the stuff is just outrageous what they found. I can't believe it. I can't give you guys spoilers. It's as simple as that, but yeah, I wish I could. So definitely go ahead, check out Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, the making of the classic film by John and Maria Jose Tenuto. Now, as for this show, I wasn't actually expecting to do a show in the middle of the summer, this late in the summer especially, because I was on my usual summer break. But just to let you guys know, new episodes will be coming soon this September as well. I don't quite know what day yet they're going to be launching, but they will be back at some point. I've already got a bunch done, and I should let you guys know that all the interviews that you're going to be seeing were done before the SAG-AFTRA strike. So that really affects people primarily in the entertainment industry, not so much some of the other guests I'm going to have on this season. And it kind of worked out the way that I was having a bunch of folks outside of just the usual actors and writers. But yeah, there are some actors this time around who are going to be talking to, and all of those, once again, were done before any of the strikes were happening in Hollywood. And if you want to learn more about the strike, by the way, I recommend you guys check out my last episode here of Trek Untold, which was all about it from a Star Trek perspective. We talked with some former guests like Armin Shimmerman, Kitty Swink, Phil Morris, Tim Lunavus, Bertilla Damas, and Lisa Klink. And this is an episode that really breaks everything down for you and puts it all into perspective about why the strike is happening, what they're fighting for, and why it actually does matter to you, not just because of the fact that you're not going to have some new shows or movies for a little while. It's because it goes way deeper than that, and it's truly about fighting for the rights of every working class person. You might not believe me when I say that, but it's the honest truth, so please check that episode out. Now, before I beam out of here and go back to my away mission on Ryza, I just want to make sure you guys are reminded to check me out at Trek Untold on all different social media platforms, including Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter or X, or who knows what it's going to be called whenever you're watching this now. And of course, please consider supporting Trek Untold on patreon.com/Trek Untold. Your contributions mean a world to me and help keep this show going. So any way you can actively support the show, please consider doing so. And once again, if you're listening to the show on any of the different podcast platforms out there, or you're watching it on YouTube, please leave a rating, a review, a comment, a thumbs up, a heart, whatever you can do to interact with it and help people find this when they're looking for a new Star Trek podcast to check out for themselves. So until next time, I'm Matthew. This has been Trek Untold. We'll see you guys here next time. And as I always say, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the Rageworks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.